Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
It is a happy Monday.
Yes.
Ready to go. Springtime is here.
How's your garden doing?
Tomato planting time.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for my fresh tomato, my bacon tomato lettuce sandwich.
Yeah. Those are great. Yeah.
Except, that sandwich cost has just gone up. Bacon is one of the most expensive things you can buy.
Half a sandwich now.
But I'm still going to eat bacon. Like that. Today we're going to talk about something we've talked about before. It would, we don't go out of our way to promote Rand. Mainly because he doesn't need to, because we don't want to hurt him, But anyway, he's in the news again. Of course, he's been in the news a whole lot on natural immunity, and that's pretty good. And I think he's had a confrontation or two with Fauci, challenging him on it. And he really has unnerved Fauci at times. But maybe today Fauci is even more unnerved because of a revelation that has been made of a statement that Fauci made a long time ago. Doesn't even look like him. He looks so young. Yeah. But he was a more honest person at that time, and immediately recognized that. So he made a point about this. This was who knows what year that Fauci was doing this. But he probably wasn't the highest paid bureaucrat in the history of mankind when he did this thing. But he was presenting the case for what is reality about immunization natural. And Rand says, once upon a time, Anthony Fauci could tell the truth about natural immunity. Now that's a headline. Yeah. Breitbart has that out there. They're quoting Rand on that. And that is true. You hear the truth and you can get pretty excited about that. But there's more and more people. Now, I love the stories when this one doesn't fit. I like it when the radical leftists sees the light and they're honest enough with themselves and us, and they will actually speak out. This case, unfortunately, this guy went in the wrong direction. But I think it's fascinating to consider, why do they do it? Why do they think this? Who influenced them? What was the motivation? I can think of some other talk show hosts on CNBC that used to be very, very conservative and now very, very, very liberal. So why do they switch like that? Some people said it can be explained in money. Of course, Fauci, that's been involved in money. I bet he didn't know Bill Gates when he gave this speech, his first speech. Yeah. But anyway, interesting stuff, and I think it's another victory for people coming to hear the truth told about this controversy, which should not be a controversy, over natural immunity.
Yeah, and one of the things we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks, there's been so much emphasis on this war, and of course the media is all over it, 24/7, everything above the fold is about the war. But while that's happening, a lot of things a little escaping under the radar, little things that are chipping away at the COVID narrative under the radar. And we would ask the indulgence of our viewers to bring some of these forward. And this is a big one. This is a big one because for 2 years, Dr. Paul, Fauci pretended like he'd never heard the term natural immunity. What are you talking about? You could be talking in Chinese to him. He would have no idea. Well, this is October in 2004, and Fauci, actually, believe it or not, he was still in the same job then. He's a lifer.
Boy.
But here he is on C-SPAN talking, and now this context was the flu, all right, but the concept is the same. And I say that for a reason that I'll say after we play this clip. But let's play the whole clip here and listen to Fauci.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And so she should not get it?
If she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine. If she really has the flu.
She should not get it again?
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
Now, the naysayers, there was a fact check that said, well, this is taken out of context, and this is, but the fact is there is a quote in there, and you have it right in front of you. The most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself. He's talking about viruses.
Isn't it amazing how this can go about, and we're shocked to hear the truth, like this, and they've gotten away with this, and yet there's going to be a lot of people vindicated by this because people lost their jobs and he got ridiculed and all kinds of things for taking a different position. But the whole thing was nuts, And so in one way, you have to give Gates accidental blurting out the truth too, because his tone has changed too. And I don't know whether he's worried about his long-time reputation or what. But this to me is really amazing. I think it should be considered a real victory in the sense that people, shouldn't be so dismissive of people who aren't towing the line and following the propaganda of the government. You think in America more people would be alert to the propaganda, and yet when you ask generic questions about do you fully trust everything the government tells you, they don't.
Yeah.
But when it's an individual thing, whether it has to do with war overseas or war at home, they can be easily intimidated and become fearful.
And this is the thing that gets a little irritating, and it's also, can almost make you a little bit angry. If we had said what Fauci said 6 months ago, 10 months ago, a year ago, we would have been canceled. A lot of people, as you say, they were canceled, they were fired, they were shunned from the social media. And now you dig back a little bit in the past, and he's saying it himself. Someone needs to ask him, maybe Senator Paul will ask him in the next hearing, when and why did you change your view on natural immunity as from this quote in 2004 until you pretended for 2 years like you had never heard of it? Why did you change your view? And he might say, well, this is a whole different thing. This is a whole different enchilada, whatever. No, he should be, they should pin him down and say, look, you pretended you never heard of the term. Now we find out that you thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, and you're probably right. So what happened? Was it about payola? Was it about money? What was it?
And Gates, referring to this incident, he says, the science has vindicated this theory, about natural immunity. Quote, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. Well, that's what has been known. I wonder how long it's been known. It isn't like 50 years or 100 years. Hundreds of years they knew about, people getting diseases and being immune and being protected and this sort of thing. That's the whole idea to develop a vaccine is they first observed it in nature. And then in recent years and recent decades, they've gone overboard with the artificial vaccinations. And they certainly should never be outlawed, and I believe some good comes from vaccines. But this whole thing of destroying the best vaccine that possible, and now they're admitting it, is natural immunity. We can't allow that to happen. We have to stamp that out. And we're in charge. We're the truth tellers. We are the protector of truth, and that's why the propaganda continues, to tell people what they have to believe. And then it affects a lot of things. Not only does it affect the health problems, like for the kids and all, but it affects the social order. How many people become upset over this and or losing jobs and didn't get to go to the church 1 week, and kids didn't get to go to athletic events, all kinds of ramifications. And we mentioned that the other day. Nobody ever could possibly measure the damage done by the lockdowns by depending on false information.
Yeah. And here's that article we're talking about. We'll put the quote up so we can read it too, because it's worth a review. Go to the next one after that. This is the first one from Breitbart of Senator Paul, and this is from the Epoch Times. Joe Wang did an op-ed, Pandemic Lessons Learned, CDC versus Natural Immunity. And we'll put up that Gates quote because it really bears repeating, Dr. Paul. And this is from the article. Maybe the CDC is like Bill Gates, who said at the Munich Security Conference last month, quote, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B cell and T cell immunity, end quote. And they go on. What he meant was it would be a sad thing, and that's what he said, a sad thing if natural immunity, not Big Pharma's vaccines, were what defeats COVID-19. And then he goes on to say, let the CDC and Mr. Gates feel sad. The rest of us are ready to move on with their lives.
I think we're making progress. More people now are open-minded to saying, well, maybe there is something like natural immunity. But there's a big question on whether this might not spread, because I keep thinking that maybe we will have this wonderful explanation and discovery that you can actually define a woman, and why a woman is different than a man, and that is real progress. But that whole thing on the definition of a woman, it really strikes my interest, because I keep thinking, wonder what going through OBGYN residency would be like. Who are you? What are you?
What are you today?
Yeah. So it's sort of crazy, and yet it isn't like somebody had a strange belief. A lot of people have had strange beliefs, but we usually don't, put them on a pedestal. But here we have somebody that believes that science doesn't provide enough information for her to know the difference between a man and a woman. So we put her on the Supreme Court of the United States. I mean, that is just crazy.
And it's a funny thing, and we all laughed about it when Senator Marsha Blackburn, who used to go to your Thursday lunches, by the way, frequently, she was questioning Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson in her Supreme Court hearing, and she said, Judge, what's a woman? She said, I don't know, I'm not a biologist. And so we're going to put up this next clip. This is kind of funny. I wasn't familiar with this representative, but it's kind of funny. Bob Good from New Hampshire, he goes down to the House, excuse me, he goes down to the House floor and he mocks the judge by referring, well, you have the rest of the story, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, he says, I'm not a doctor, I'm not and thinking the person speaker.
Person speaker, not Madam
Well,
Speaker.
I get tongue-tied on all this stuff. Not Madam Speaker. It used to be not like you've committed a crime if you called everybody Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, you can't do that at all. So it was Madam Speaker, Miss Speaker, but now it's Person Speaker.
Person Speaker.
But you'd think this would embarrass them a little bit, but they keep plodding along and making fun of it, and that's probably about the best you can do.
Yeah.
You're not going to change it, because it's amazing how powerful and influential the wokeism people are. They have so much control, and as it becomes evident that the whole thing's nutty. You'd think they'd be backing off, but there's still a lot of people. I mean, how about Disney?
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is that has awakened some parents a little bit. What's going on there, because they've probably been sneaking it in for decades, but now everybody knows what their goal really is in life. Promoting that wokeism stuff.
It's very sick, very sick. Well, our last story of the day is a good news story. We need one after all this stuff. And I think it's a good news story because I find this person fascinating. We talked about him before the show. I'm sure he's not perfect. I'm not an expert on him, but he is very colorful. Let's put up that next clip. Elon Musk buys 9.2% of Twitter amid complaints about free speech. And I think the prices went up, the share prices went up quite a bit when he put in several $1 billion, right?
26%.
26%. That's a big increase.
How come he didn't call us and tell us?
Tip us off.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating because here's how it teed up, Dr. Paul. This was over the past few days. Musk has been sort of hinting through his tweets. Let's put this up. Here he is. He does a poll on March 25th. Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy. Do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle? A whopping 70.4% said no. And he said the consequences of this poll will be important. Please vote carefully. And then after this poll, let's do the next one. Everyone says they don't adhere to it. And he says, given that Twitter serves as a de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. What should be done? And I saw this tweet when it came out. A lot of people said, buy Twitter, buy Twitter. Tons of people said that, and he bought a big chunk of it afterward.
That's right. But the test is going to be, because Twitter and Trump had a little conflict there.
Yeah.
And I thought this was pretty amazing in a country that brags about freedom of speech, and they have a president who's not allowed to use a public platform.
Yeah.
And so they kicked him off, and that was no big deal. But the big question now, because this is advertised, the best thing he could do to help is help sort out the private property thing.
Yeah.
Because there's, with what he says there, and it's going to be protection of free speech, there's at least a statement there of a contract with the people that he's serving. With their Twitter platform. But that isn't. So I don't know what he'll do with Trump, but that to me would be a neat little test to let Trump go back on that. Well, you know what? If his stock went up 26%, it'll probably go up another 26%.
Yeah, that's true.
If Trump can go back on it.
The one thing they say is that he does tend to take an active role in companies that he buys a portion of. So if this is what's on his mind, I think it's very good news. I think people on the left and the right that have been banned, I wouldn't mind having at Daniel L. McAdams returned. As you know, I was kicked off in 2019 for a very, very minor infraction. In fact, I told the truth. But of course, they're going to say to you, "Oh, Ron, it's private. You can't say that." Well, as we've been saying for years, they're doing the bidding of the government. But here's a little insight into Musk, and this is when this is back early in March after the war broke out. He said Starlink has been told by some governments, not Ukraine, to block Russian news sources. We will not do so unless at gunpoint. Sorry to be a free speech absolutist. And that says a lot about where his thinking is, that he's not going to be bullied around into selecting who gets to talk and who doesn't get to talk. And here's kind of a broader context. So after all this took place, but just before he bought the stock, here's an interesting tweet from Jack Dorsey, the founder and former CEO of Twitter. Put this up. This is fascinating. And you alluded to this earlier, Dr. Paul. Jack said, "The days of Usenet, IRC, and the web, even email with PGP were amazing. Centralizing discovery and identity into corporations really damaged the internet. I realize I'm partially to blame and regret it."
I like to see this because I had experience in campaigning, and sometimes it was very predictable. If you had a conservative, this is in the presidential campaign, if you had a conservative commentator interviewing you, you can expect easy questions, and sometimes I didn't like those because it looked like they were spoon feeding you. Then you'd have the radical left. All they want to do is ridicule and make fun of everything. But every once in a while, there's somebody that will be straightforward. And the one episode I enjoyed the most, who changed his mind, and that was Bill Maher.
Yeah.
And I bet you some of the people who were supporting me in my campaign will remember the interview, because the first time up, he really went after me, and I think in his mind, he was talking to a hawkish Republican pro-war person, and here it turned out within a week or so, he read about what I was doing in Congress trying to prevent the war from starting. The next week, he had me on again, almost like very apologetic. He said, "Last week I did this, but this week Ron Paul's my hero." So, but not many people will do that.
No.
And now he's speaking out again. He said this wokeism has gone too far, but I still believe that he has the instincts of a progressive, especially that part of the progressives that are well motivated to try to help people and might be misled on a few economic matters.
Yeah, the part that we like about the liberals and the progressives. Well, I'm going to close out with a couple comments.
There you go.
The first one, we hadn't talked about it. I'm fascinated by the results of the Hungarian elections over the weekend. As you know, the leading party, they ran on a platform of anti-war. We don't want to get involved, whereas Poland is pushing us toward World War III. Orban in Hungary said, "We are not going to get involved. We will not allow weapons to transship through our territory, and we don't want any part of this war on either side. We want to stay neutral." They were expected to be routed by some because of this, and in fact, they won a supermajority in Parliament. So the people voted for the anti-war position, and I think that's fascinating. It'll be interesting to watch. The people in Brussels are furious about this. But the last one is for our viewers. This is a save the date notice. You're hearing it here first, which is save the date, June 4th of this year. The Ron Paul Institute will be holding its next conference. It'll be in the Houston area. We'll have more details soon. The topic is about foreign policy. It's about the changing geopolitical situation in the context of the war in Ukraine and Russia. I have some great speakers, including someone who's physically right close to me right now. It's going to be a great conference. Houston, June 4th. There will be a limited number of tickets. It'll be smaller than our Washington conference. We'll be sure to let you know in advance, but get that calendar out and mark June 4th in Houston. Dr. Paul?
Very good. You know, I want to talk a little bit about the frustration at times of trying to get the real facts. And if you depend on the usual sources, and I have to use those to some degree, whether it's television or the internet or whatever, or individuals, but to find out exactly what's happening, in this fight between Russia and NATO. And all of a sudden, you get two sides, and they're pretty precise, even though like the Republican Party might be split on it. I don't know exactly really what's happening there. I can make assumptions, but I think there's a way to go before we'll find out the final thing, because we're told by the pro-Ukrainian people, oh, the Russians are being defeated, they're retreating and they're running off, and there's evidence that they show the pictures to verify what they're saying, but there's nothing that says that they are stating the truth, and it goes on. But the one thing is the absence, once again, like the absence of telling the truth about natural immunity, is the truth about how did this thing get started. And I got into trouble once by saying, why? Why do they do this? Don't you have to think back? And of course, we have emphasized so much thinking back to to 2014, when we believe a big incident happened because United States and NATO colluded in a coup that we're suffering from ever since, and the war is a consequence of that. And yet all it is automatic, total and perfect hatred toward Russia. And I'm not exactly comfortable by saying I'm going to endorse everything Russia does, because they're no more perfect. But I know we're imperfect, and I know the role that we played in, and I know the responsibility of an American citizen. You ought to try to point out the problems our own government's having, especially if you're in politics. You shouldn't go along with this. But when there's a vote in Congress, you might only get one or two, or say, oh, we shouldn't have participated in that coup. That was one of the biggest reasons why NATO now is in a war with Russia, and it's getting very dangerous. So it's difficult, but eventually, just like we finally heard the truth come out, and people are starting to realize the truth about natural immunity, and I think that is great. And you hear on occasion a few progressive Democrats. We had some members of Congress who switched in the middle of leading up to the war in Iraq and the stuff going on in Afghanistan. So it does happen. People will change. But I think that is the goal and the challenge of all of us who happen to believe in a different foreign policy and a different economic policy. The one thing for sure, it can't be done with more aggressive. You can't compete with them. You can't compete with their guns. You can't compete with yelling and shouting. And really, ultimately, you can't compete with just political power and money making by the special interests. Eventually, it has to boil down to doing our very best in gaining and understanding the real truth of the matter, and pass that on to the American people so they can make a better choice in picking the type of foreign policy that we want and the kind of members of Congress that we want. At the same time, having people be more open-minded, about our foreign policy. And Bill Maher did the difference. I thought one thing, he was apologetic, and he changed. That just doesn't happen along. So he's in the news mainly to get bashed, by the progressive who thinks he deserved it. And here he is sort of being independent-minded and setting a standard that they ought to at least look at and consider. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.